Do you seek the freedom to pursue greater meaning and purpose in your life? Is there something that you're passionate about that you'd like to support by giving time, talent, or money? Do you seek a level of financial freedom to live an ideal life as you uniquely define it? Welcome to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to helping you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most.
Hello and welcome to the Money and Meaning Show. My name is Jeff Bernier. I am so delighted that you decided to spend a few minutes with us today. As you know, I am your guide on our monthly discussions around money and meaning. And the way I think about this is, we want to have deep discussions around meaning and purpose and what gives you joy. What is your why? Help you uncover some ideas around figuring out what really gives you purpose in your life, and combine that with discussions around wealth management topics so that we can help you with some ideas around creating the means. So that's what the money part is about, obviously, is how do we create the means to go live our version or your individual version of a meaningful life. And so it's my privilege to be your guide. And as your guide, I'm just bringing on some really talented people to help us navigate some of these waters. And today, we are really, really fortunate to have Brian Portnoy. I've known about Brian and have heard Brian speak a number of times and read some of his books, and just really flattered to have him on today. And I think you're going to really get a lot out of this. And so let me just first of all introduce Brian, and then I'll have him chime in here. But let me introduce Brian Portnoy. He's an expert in simplifying the complex world of money, and he's written 3 really important books: The Investor's Paradox, The Geometry of Wealth, and his most recent book, How I Invest My Money. And he helps individuals, investors make better financial decisions, how to make better decisions. But it's all around how money fits into a joyful life. Brian is the founder of Shaping Wealth, a financial wellness platform that helps individuals and organizations make better financial decisions. He is a keynote speaker, seminar leader, coaches, advisors, and investors on the connection between money and happiness. For more than 2 decades, he's worked in our industry in a number of different types of roles that we may get into, both the investment management side at hedge funds and mutual funds, and Morningstar, which is a research organization. He's a CFA charter holder, has a doctorate from the University of Chicago, serves on the advisory board of the Alliance for Decision Education, and he lives there in Chicago with his wife. So welcome, Brian. That's probably more than you wanted to hear, but thank you for joining us today.
I'm really happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and I always I like to try to help create a connection between our audience and our guests. So to do that, I'd love just to hear about you personally for just a couple of minutes. Do you mind just telling us briefly about yourself and your family?
Thrilled to. It's my favorite topic. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
My wife, Tracy, and I, we've been married for 22 years. We have 3 kids, 20, 18, and 16. So a sophomore at University of Illinois, a freshman at Michigan State University, and a sophomore in high school, Ben, Zach, and Sarah. And yeah, we've been here in Chicago all along. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, but I moved here for graduate school in the in the 90s. And yeah, we built a family here. Wrigley Field is about a mile right behind me to the east. In fact, one of my sons works the stands at Wrigley every summer, selling water and snacks and all of that. So he gets to see the games for free. He gets paid to see the games. That's who we are.
Okay, cool. Well, as I mentioned in your bio, that you've had a sort of a varied career that has evolved, it sounds, and I'd love to just hear a little bit about that. So how did you go from the investment management, highly technical hedge fund industry, and evolve into coaching advisors on improving investor outcomes through behavioral investing? How did this all come about in terms of your career path?
Yeah, so I've had many careers. In fact, as I count, I'm on my fifth career. Started out in politics as a young man, went to graduate school, did a PhD, not in economics, but in political science.
Hmm.
So studied politics and economics and law and business and a number of other things on the south side of Chicago, and decided not to pursue an academic career. Decided I just didn't want to be a professor, even though my passion is still learning and teaching. Ended up getting a job somewhat randomly at Morningstar, which at the time wasn't as big as it is now, but very prominent investment research company. Had a fabulous experience there doing investment research. And was hired away into the hedge fund industry at a so-called fund of funds, a firm that would allocate institutional capital to hedge fund investments on behalf of pension funds and insurance companies and endowments and foundations. So, yeah, I spent a good 15 plus years really in the weeds of analyzing investments. And somewhere along the way, about, I don't know, 10, 11, 11, 12 years ago, I just randomly started to read in the field of behavioral psychology and social psychology and behavioral finance. And man, like the light bulb went on. I found it fascinating, so much so that I've now published 3 books in the field. And the first book was really about my walkabout in the mutual fund and hedge fund industries, and all of the decisions that I made and colleagues made, many of which were not good ones, and just trying to figure out, like, how does this work? How do our brains make good or bad decisions? And that evolved from just decision making on investments to a broader set of considerations about where money fits into a meaningful life. And part of that was a professional progression, but honestly, Jeff, a big part of it was just me growing up, aging, seeing my kids age, and thinking about the world that they live in and how they're going to do well or not do well in the years and decades to come. So really, the passion that has built for me is on this question of financial well-being, this notion of funded contentment that I'm sure we're going to talk about
Right.
a bit, and recognizing that money is an incredibly emotional topic. It's the hardest thing to talk about. All of the surveys and studies that are out there show that money is a harder topic than politics, divorce, religion, you name it. And there are reasons for that. There are evolutionary reasons for that. There are psychological reasons for that. And so for me, I feel like a kid in a candy store. There's just an endless number of topics to explore that I think can ultimately help people lead better lives.
Yeah, I love it. I have, like you, as my career has evolved, and I think it's a journey, even as professionals that we go on occasionally, and so I've become passionate about having these deep discussions with real people about what gives meaning to their lives and helping them create the clarity and capacity to go do it. But I also love the behavioral coaching aspects of it, because I believe that it can have the most impact, quite frankly. It can have more impact than even portfolio design, as an example. Is my opinion, and of course I love evidence-based investing too. So I'm sort of ADD in that world. I get to talk about all 3, and this show was just is an excuse for me to talk about it and to bring on really smart people who have done a lot more research and a lot more writing than I have, deeper, because I just scratched the surface, in certainly the behavioral side. And in some of your writing, you talk a little bit about the importance of both material and spiritual planning. In other words, going deeper than just the shallow in terms of, why we're here. And do you mind talking a little bit about that, about what you discovered and some of your research about the importance of going deeper?
For sure. So, one thing, and I mentioned it a moment ago, a term or an idea that I want to introduce right off the bat is this idea of funded contentment.
Yeah, let's go there.
Yeah. So in the Geometry of Wealth, I think it's on page 1. I say there's a fork in the road between being rich and being wealthy. And, rich is a number. Rich is a quest for more. That quest for more is ultimately unsatisfying, because what we want after we get more is even more. We're wired that way. And there's nothing wrong with accumulating dollars, but we should be careful about thinking about what problems that might solve for us, if any. So rich is one thing, but wealthy is another. And so the definition of funded contentment for me, or what I would call true wealth, is the ability to underwrite a life that is meaningful to you, no matter how you choose to define that. And, topics of purpose and meaning seem in some ways kind of an awkward topic in the context of money and portfolios and spreadsheets and, mutual funds and insurance and estate plans and all that. But you don't really need to scratch the surface much to realize that when we're talking about money and where it fits into our day-to-day life, we quickly begin to explore bigger topics of like the life that you want to lead. So if funded contentment is the ability to underwrite a meaningful life, then we can sort of quote unquote go there. We can say, well, what is a meaningful life? And I've got sort of a mental model that is, I think, pretty straightforward and simple, that gives us at least some vocabulary to think about that. And then the funding part, the money part, comes second. I joked in the Geometry of Wealth that book was a prequel to my first book. My first book was sort of a book about getting rich. It was about making good investment decisions. Right. Hey, how do you choose the right investments?
Implementation.
Yeah. Exactly. And I got to the end of that book with sort of this hollow feeling like, what does this all really matter in the grand context of things? And so, I started writing Geometry of Wealth, I want to say in 2015, 2016. So, it's 8-9 years now of really trying to come to terms with this question. You've written a book on money and meaning. You know this as well as anyone. Money triggers these questions, these introspections, and the material abundance that we seek is not a bad thing, but it's important to recognize it as very incomplete in the context of us all seeking out happy and fulfilled lives.
Right. Do you think most people, either because of the culture or their peer group or whatever, marketing and advertising, whatever the cause, do you think most people fail to go deep, to start asking these deeper questions, or they just get on the treadmill with sort of unconscious and get into a pattern before they ever go to the woods and really do? We got the process backwards, right? So we started pursuing because that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what society teaches us will make us happy. Do you think most people fail getting deeper? Is that part of the problem, do you think?
Yeah. Fail has a certain pejorative tone to it. And so I don't want to assign that to people as if like they've made a mistake.
Human. Yeah, for being human.
Yeah. Ultimately, what we want to do is understand and improve the human experience of money. And the first step of that is to understand what it means to be human. And that's a big topic. We don't have time to cover all elements of what it means to be human. But one of the key dimensions of being human is trying to find a balance or a rhythm between wanting more and having enough. And so, we could layer on the societal piece, the American societal piece, the 2020s American societal piece. So, the way we are now isn't the way we were before. Also, our society versus other societies, there's a ton of complexity. So instead of doing that, let's go back 100,000 years and just recognize that we need to be on the go. We need to be achieving. We do need to be on this so-called hedonic treadmill, and that's a fancy term for your listeners, but it's from the social psychology literature, and it basically means that no matter what you pursue in life, even when you achieve your goals, you're going to want that next thing. So there's a great line from one of my favorite shows, Mad Men, when Don Draper says that happiness is that feeling right before you want more happiness.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so I wouldn't assign blame to people. However, in the sense that we are wired to desire, to want more, to achieve, to grow. Those are good. Those are healthy things. That's the source of progress. That's fun. That's joyful. When we bring this or attach this to money life, one thing that almost never happens, though, is that we, whether it as financial advisors and coaches, let alone individuals, trying to make sense of this all, we're really not given permission and validation to go to that deeper level. In some sense, money is a language that no one speaks fluently. And the vocabulary, the grammar, the syntax of money, it kind of almost never gets dealt with. And I'm not talking about in middle school or high school when we talk about money as a unit of account and a store of value and a means of exchange. Okay, so those technical things are true, but money is an emotional lightning rod. It's a podium on which we speak to the world. It's a weapon that we use to hurt others. Money is many things.
Right.
And so if we begin to think of money through the lens of vocabulary, of language, us all running around crazy, and now these days showing how crazy we are on social media, it's in part because there's very little social acknowledgement of how hard this is. And I think and I've built a whole business around this, as you know. I think one of the real callings of the modern financial advisor is just not as a mechanic to build the right portfolio, to purchase the right insurance, to structure the estate plan the exact right way. It's also to serve as guide. So it's one thing to build the vehicle and to make sure the engine is running, portfolios, insurance estates. It's another thing to ask whether the vehicle is pointed in the right direction. That's a different skill set. That's a different set of questions. And that's where modern advice, I think, has not done a great job, but there's been progress there, and I'm optimistic it's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I love your tone. I'm drawing a blank on the behavioral finance professor out in California. I'm talking about, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, but anyway,
finance for normal people.
No, I'm trying to think of the professor and the academic that, but he talks about, and your tone is similar. He talks about the danger we have in the industry of judging, because we judge. We tend to, when we talk about behavioral finance, I find we often talk about it like we're on high and we've got all this wisdom about how to behave better, and it doesn't recognize what you just mentioned in your tone. Is that this is how, we're human beings. We have these characteristics which they've helped us as a species thrive, but there's a, like all things in life, there's a paradox, because it can lead to bad outcomes in terms of well-being if you get on that treadmill and you don't think about it. But you came at it in your tone just then, which I really liked, about without judgment. Because I think oftentimes in our industry, when we start talking about behavior coaching, it's like, we know how to behave better and you don't. And so let me tell you how to behave better. And
there's a lot of statistics out there. Vanguard has stuff. Other firms, say that the the highest use or the most important role that an advisor plays is as behavioral coach. And on one level, I have to agree because I've built an entire company on the back of behavioral coaching. But at another level, I completely disagree precisely because of what you've just alluded to, which is that, coaching as it's been kind of conceptualized in many circles is basically us telling people how flawed they are and that we're going to fix them.
Right.
And it's sort of, there's been an evolution. I'll draw a parallel to the psychology discipline, which, modern psychology was invented in the late 19th century by William James, and it coursed through a lot of people like Freud and Skinner and others. And for a lot of the last century or so in modern psychology, the tone has been fixing broken people. And by analogy, financial advice is about, fixing people who don't get it. They are irrational, which is a fancy word for stupid. And I don't appreciate that. What we've had over the last quarter century, though, and it's really picked up a lot of steam in the last 10 years or so, is a different field of psychology called positive psychology, invented in some ways at the University of Pennsylvania by a guy named Marty Seligman. But if you go into an airport bookstore now, half the books on the shelves I would call positive psychology, which is a term that means the science of happiness. And so what we can do as advisors and coaches, and what investors can do for themselves and their partners and their kids and their parents and their communities, is to kind of get off of our back foot and onto our front foot and say, hey, I just want to be a little bit better. I'm not going from -1 to 0. Most people are okay most of the time. How can we be 10% happier? How can we make things a little bit better? And as a first step, how can we stop pathologizing normal human behavior and calling it irrational?
Right.
And Jeff, I know you and I are going to do some work together on some projects later this year, and you're going to hear me say many times that we are normal and that we're not allowed to use the word irrational or rational. We're just going to jettison that vocabulary because it sets up kind of a judgment paradigm that is unhealthy for everybody involved. Right. And so if we want to acknowledge that the world needs a little bit more kindness, and that one of the engines of kindness is empathy. If you enter any relationship, and forget the money piece, just your marriage or with your kids or your friends, if you enter without judgment, you open up the opportunity for empathy, and man, good things happen from there.
That's rich. That's really helpful. Well, thank you for going a little deeper on that, because I sense it in the industry, and I think I'm guilty of it as well. If you look at some of my writing, I'm talking about the mistakes that we all make, by the way, mistakes get made all the time. Bad decisions get made all the time, but that's sort of adjacent to, but not the same as saying that like we are broken. So. Right.
Yeah.
No, I like it. And I'm looking forward to learning more about it in some of the stuff we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. But so let me back up to Geometry of Wealth for a moment. And it was so insightful and impactful to you, apparently, that you created your logo and your firm, Shaping Wealth, out of the idea of these three major concepts. And we don't have time to go deep on it, but do you mind just defining what the three shapes represent?
Yeah, so let me give a few seconds of context here. So
please.
The idea is that each of us would like to achieve or experience funded contentment. We want to have the sense that money fits into our life in a meaningful way. Okay, so not rich, not turning $1 million into $2 million, but aligning or calibrating sort of the life we want to live with our balance sheets, with our portfolio. So then the question is, how do we achieve funded contentment, if only for a while? And the answer there is a 3-step process that I defined in the Geometry of Wealth and summarized through simple shapes, because I think it's, for people like you and me, it's our job to simplify. I mean, there's a difference between simple and simplistic. But simple is good. Going from complex to simple is good. How do you achieve funded contentment? Well, there's three things. The first thing you do is you define purpose and meaning. The second thing is you identify your priorities, both financial and non-financial, within the context of the purpose that you've defined. And then the third step is that you make a whole series of decisions, little ones and big ones, in order to fulfill your priorities as well as your purpose. And so circle, triangle, square, purpose, priorities, decisions. The circle is, and each is symbolic. So with purpose, as my dad says, it's a round world. We're always figuring things out, and you're sort of never done.
Yeah, it's an evolution.
Yeah. It's not like we get to some moment in life where we say, "Oh, I figured it all out," and then you're done. No, I think life happens. Challenges happen, good things happen, things happen. So we're sort of never done as humans figuring things out. And so as we try to define what a meaningful life is, that is the circle, the ongoing thing. As it relates to the triangle and setting priorities, to me, there's sort of three things that we need to consider, hence the three-sided shape. It's basically sort of what I call protect, balance, and reach, meaning that our first priority is to protect ourselves, to make sure that we survive, that we hedge or manage or eliminate risk. The second priority is to achieve balance or equilibrium or homeostasis in our lives. And then the third is to aspire and to reach. As Casey Kasem said, you keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars.
Right.
And this triangle, these three priorities kind of correspond to what I call the evolutionary two-step. We survive and we thrive. We survive and we thrive. This is, you can't lose the game on any particular day, but you don't have to win the game. You want to stay in the game. You want to stay alive. You want to and then you're in a position to do amazing things. The third step, final step, is making decisions, and it's a square. In the context of the book, it's a square because there's four different decisions that I talk about, but generally there's a number of dimensions of money life that we're making decisions about. And, we want to be precise and articulate about what those decisions are. All of this is on a loop. All of this is iterated. So,
right.
Funded contentment is sort of there's an element of mindfulness to it. There's an element of presence to it. I would distinguish it from achieving goals. So when we think about goals, and I want to retire at age 62 with a certain amount of money, or I want to buy that vacation home, or I want to pay for my kids' college. Like, those are goals, and those are virtuous goals, and they come and they go, and we achieve them or we don't. But those are always in the future. Right. And we know, because of this hedonic treadmill that we've talked about earlier, that when you achieve those goals, you might feel happy for a moment, but then you say, what's next? That's right. Just who we are.
Right.
Funded contentment is something that you experience in the moment, in the present, and it could be a very mindful experience that things are okay, that you're going to be okay. That in itself doesn't last forever. So the circle, triangle, square, the purpose, priorities, decision, dynamic, it's just on a loop. It just keeps going, and for some that might be frustrating. Like, oh, why can't I just get there?
Right.
Well, it's not about getting there. That's a goals-oriented mentality. This is about lifestyle.
Now,
it's about now, and let's make the now as long as possible.
Yeah, and enjoying the journey.
Just enjoying the journey. It's very much about the journey.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get back to the journey in a moment, but let me ask you one more term that you've coined that I have not heard before: adaptive simplicity. Mm-hmm. You used the term adaptive simplicity, and I can't remember if this is related to the circle, the triangle, or the square. But how are you using the term adaptive simplicity? What does that mean?
Yeah, no, it's a term that I guess I coined in the book. It's the funded contentment is the one that's sort of been recognized all over, and
yes.
People seem to like that. I haven't really used adaptive simplicity as much as I would like, because I do love the concept. And it's simply this idea that one of the things that is virtuous in our lives is simplifying the complex. And that, especially now, we are just overwhelmed. It's not clear that our brains were wired to process as much information as we're being confronted with right now.
Right.
These are the noisiest of times in all of recorded human history. And so, as we go through the process of trying to understand and achieve, if only for a while, this thing called funded contentment, sort of the engine to do that is adaptive simplicity. I have explained the simplicity part. The adaptive part is this evolutionary journey that we're on, where we're just always figuring things out. Yes, we can write down our goals and our aspirations. Yes, we can do a bunch of stuff, in our own minds. But there's also the world out there that's putting up different roadblocks, and but also different, open lanes and opportunities. And so this idea that, well, we want to focus on what's important. We want to go from complex and noisy to simpler and quiet. That requires an adaptive mindset. That requires this ability. Actually, it's an attitude before it's an ability. It's an attitude to take the world as it comes and pivot accordingly.
Yeah. Well, our industry needs a lot of work there too, obviously, because we oftentimes equate complex with wise, or complex as sophisticated. And I think in some of your mental models that you're talking about, actually, the simpler is actually the more sophisticated, because it's the things that matter most. So it's really about chiseling away all the things that don't matter and focusing on what matters most. And I think that's what I think I heard in some respects, is how do you gain the wisdom through all these inputs, but simplify it in a way that's meaningful and useful in actually implementing a financial plan, or discovering what really matters, or dealing with the challenge that you face today without getting overwhelmed by all of the confetti that's being thrown at you.
I like the image of the confetti. The financial services industry, generally speaking, embraces the complex in order to confuse its customers so that they can continue to sell expensive, ineffective products. What's exciting about where the leading edge of financial advice is going is that it sort of, rejects and moves away from that complexity and says, there are simpler and frankly inexpensive ways to build portfolios that will be effective for you over the long run. But that's not a message that has historically been accepted by the industry. You know the old book, Where Are the Customer's Yachts?
Right.
This has generally been an industry filled with organizations who simply want to sell, complicated, high-priced stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
and like I get it. It's it's not difficult to understand. But if we really want to embrace the virtuous elements of modern financial advice, we might have to also embrace lower margins, and while helping people lead better lives.
Yeah. Well, I've got two other things I'd love to chat about briefly here before we wrap up. And one is, when I met you in person was at Future Proof, so a conference out in California last September, and you did a really impactful short workshop on story, uncovering our story, helping our clients uncover their story. Why do you think, and I write about this in my book, I tried to, very shallow, I might add, but I tried to use some of Joseph Campbell's information about the hero's journey as a metaphor for kind of the life that we go through. And I think it can be powerful. So why do you think story and narrative is so important in terms of helping communicate, helping build connections, or behavior change?
Yeah, it's an important topic, and that's a great question. The answer in short is that humans are born as storytellers. We're not born as calculators. The financial services complex treats us as calculators, and they want to through the language of numbers and spreadsheets. But that's not what we are wired for. There's now an enormous amount of research in neuroscience and anthropology and other disciplines that makes it clear that, humans, the first thing that we sort of did was tell stories. And we had some sense of who we are and where we were going, and it's an exciting and kind of provocative framework for thinking about like one of the initial things you and I talked about on this podcast, which is like, well, what does it mean to be human? One of those things is storytellers. We are storytellers. So it leads to me a kind of obvious question, which is, well, why aren't we integrating storytelling into the context of financial planning? Because there's no doubt that financial planning is in no small part about us living the lives that we want or our clients want to live. And there are certain lessons we can take from narrative structure, from the science of storytelling, that gives us a window into who our clients are, certainly gives us a window into who we are as individuals before, we serve as advisors or coaches. And, you mentioned The Hero's Journey and Joseph Campbell, and, a book I'd highly recommend, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, where Joseph Campbell, who's a professor of mythology at Swarthmore, and if your listeners haven't watched the Bill Moyers special from many years ago,
it's terrific.
It's absolutely worthwhile. And what he points out in incredible detail is that if you review the main stories and myths that societies have told themselves going back to the dawn of recorded anything, we've been telling the same story over and over again across cultures and across time. And that might tell us something about who we are. And, it ends up now that 18 of the 25 highest grossing movies of all time are some version of the hero's journey. Basically, this idea that, you are, you're just a regular Joe or Jane, and you're beginning to feel udgy and like, there's something bigger out there in the world, but you resist the call, but then you ultimately heed the call. And somewhere along the way, you find a guide, you find helpers who can, help you along the path. And there you have, sort of wins and losses, and life happens. And ultimately, you try to achieve that thing or get to that place, only to find yourself back at the beginning. And it's whether it's Star Wars or the Hunger Games, or the Devil Wears Prada,
those elements are there,
or the Lion King. They are almost verbatim the same story, and we love them because it maps to who we are. And so I'll just wrap by saying that why not think of financial planning through the lens of narrative structure, through the narrative arc, and why not have financial advisors skilled and trained in narrative structure so that they can better help their clients define not just what they want to do, but who they want to be.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the way you communicated that. I tried to do that in my book, like I said, The Money and Meaning Journey. I did it in the context of the mid to late career person who's been through, and they're at different stages in the journey as they move forward. But that's and again, that Bill Moyers piece is terrific. If it's easy to find, it's on YouTube, so I'd recommend that. Last two things was so your latest book was a collaboration you did with Josh Brown, where you interviewed some of our colleagues, leaders in the wealth management industry, a lot of different types of disciplines, but generally leaders that you and I know their names because they're out and about a lot and speaking circuits and publishing and blogging and whatnot. and you interviewed them, I think, and wrote a great book on how they manage their own money. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious. I mean, we're moving away a little bit from some of the theoretical stuff here into more practical, but anything you found surprising about any of those interviews or any of those stories from our peers?
So, well, these weren't interviews; these were self-written essays.
Oh, they were. Okay.
Yeah. So we compiled. We compiled. So we asked Morgan Housel and Christine Benz and Alex Chalekian and Desarte Yarnway and a number of prominent financial advisors and other financial experts. Basically, like how do you invest your money? It's a question that many financial professionals have never been asked and never really felt compelled to answer. And probably, I don't know if it was surprising, but the most illuminating lesson from the book was simply the fact that everybody does it differently. That it's pretty easy to define some investment orthodoxy, and no one abides by it. Everyone's got their own wrinkle, their own thing, which is to be expected because we're all living different lives with different challenges. I mean, we can talk generally about what it means to be human, but what it means to be Jeff versus Brian are two different things. So we saw 25 chapters with 25 different life stories. The book was called How I Invest My Money. It could have been better called Why I Invest My Money, because most people did gravitate not toward, oh, well, here's the line items in my portfolio, but like why I make the decisions I do. What are my priorities? What are my values? What are my goals? And so, which is
where we started this conversation.
That's exactly right. Yeah. See, everything's a circle. Everything comes back. So the book's now published in 8 different languages. It seems to have hit a nerve in our industry. And one thing we do at Shaping Wealth is help financial advisors write their money story. And what we find in 90% of the situations or instances is that financial professionals, financial advisors who have been for 15, 20, 25 plus years advising people on money have never been asked, how do you invest your money, or how do you think, where does money fit into your life? It's been a very interesting journey along those lines.
What a valuable service. Well, thanks for sharing that. As you were talking about the different ways that advisors manage their own money relative to, quote, industry best practices, perhaps, that we, it reminds me of something I heard about physicians at one time. And many, I read a research, and maybe it was some of yours, I don't even remember where I saw it, but it said something along the lines of many physicians who, will prescribe, dramatic care for people late in cancer treatments, as an example. If they are themselves facing a terminal illness, they usually don't go to those dramatic steps. They look more for quality of life and palliative care and things of that nature, which kind of reminds me of that. It's what what they're encouraging us to do in terms of seeking, all the remedies. Oftentimes they don't take them themselves because they value quality of life over extending their life by a number of months or days or years or whatever. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So thanks for that insight. So you went in briefly. So let's just talk about Shaping Wealth for a moment. So tell me a little bit about the mission of your firm, Shaping Wealth, and kind of what you're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah. So, as shouldn't be surprising from the name, my company, Shaping Wealth, was inspired by not just what I wrote about in The Geometry of Wealth, but how it's been received out in the world globally. And the idea, the mission is very plain to state and close to my heart, which is funded contentment for everyone. That to the extent that wealth is as much of a mindset as it is a number, that this is something that can be shared and taught and communicated, and that there's an opportunity to improve people's lives through a discussion of financial well-being, to give permission to talk about the one thing that no one wants to talk about, money, People want to talk about politics, religion, sex, marriage, you name it.
Right.
No one wants to talk about money. So let's create, an easy and acceptable way to really go there. So the mission funded contentment for everyone is something that I just deeply believe in. From a business point of view, we mainly serve the wealth management industry. So we get to the end investor through their advisors, because we think that in our role as coaching the coaches, so to speak, we can get to many families, many communities across the world. Now, not everybody works with a financial advisor. In fact, most people don't work with a financial advisor. But I do feel like, all things considered, it's an effective way to get our mission into the world. The company's been around for a couple years, a little bit more than a couple years, and we put coaching and content, different resources and tools into the world for financial advisors and their clients to understand and improve the human experience of money. So we do some coaching programs. Our flagship program is called Building the Behavioral Advisor. It's a super cool 100-day journey, very carefully staged experience that is cohort-based, meaning, it tends to be 15 to 20 advisors at a time. And that's been a lot of fun to get up and running. And then in addition to courses like that, we have a general resource or experience that we call the Outsourced Chief Behavioral Officer. It's a lot of syllables to basically say, hey, we got your back. That very, very, very few advisors are going to have a chief behavioral officer, meaning someone in their company who's in charge of better decision making. Now, some of the really big firms do have that. Most don't and won't. At the same time, 99.8% of advisors these days will acknowledge that the psychology of money matters, client and advisor psychology matters, but there's just so much stuff out there from the psychology discipline and neuroscience and behavioral finance. And so what we've put together is this really cool platform called OCBO, where we are your outsourced chief behavioral officer. And for a monthly or annual subscription, you get a pretty large number of content, coaching moments, resources that you can pretty easily use in your practice on a day-to-day basis.
Right. Well, that's true. Thanks for sharing all that. I think this is relevant regardless of what's going on in the world, because I think people need it, and it's a value to people going to this level of coaching and advice. But I think it's particularly important in the environment that we may find ourselves, at least with my ideal client, who is this mid to late career professional who's moving in to Act Two, and they're facing some headwinds that we haven't seen in before. And so getting clear on what really matters and, what does it really take to be happy might be more important. Certainly, investing appropriately to fund your goals, to create this funded contentment, may require a different way of thinking in terms of risk and reward and volatility. And so I just think in the potential environment that we're in today, it's even more important. And so I'm excited to be in your cohort, in one of your new cohorts. So thank you for allowing me to do that. So we just got a couple minutes here. Let me just close by letting you tell us how people can find out more about Brian Portnoy and Shaping Wealth.
Sure. And I appreciate you, Jeff, and everything you put into the world. You've written a really good book on this topic, and I'm here for it. It's great. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. I mean, for the company, shapingwealth.com is the landing page, and there's a few resources there. So shapingwealth.com. I'm pretty active on social media. Twitter, the financial Twitter community has been great in terms of people to meet and learning and sharing ideas. And so I'm at Brian Portnoy. Okay. I'm on LinkedIn just as me, and those are the places.
Great. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Brian. This has been really fantastic. I think our listeners will really value some of this information. I really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you guys for participating and joining us today. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at moneyandmeaning@tandemgrowth.com. We mentioned my book a couple of times, The Money and Meaning Journey. You can check it out at all the major online retailers or at jeffbernierauthor.com, where you can, get more information about some of these ideas. But it's been a pleasure being with you today, and take care, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Money and Meaning Show with Jeff Bernier, a show dedicated to help you gain the confidence and freedom to lead a life of personal significance and help you get your actions and resources in alignment with what matters most. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions for Jeff or comments on the show, feel free to reach out to us at moneyandmeaning@tandemgrowth.com, or you can find us on the web at www.tandemgrowth.com. Jeff Bernier is the President and Chief Investment Officer at Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. This show is a production of Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC. All information discussed is general in nature, is provided for informational purposes only, and should not be construed as specific financial, legal, or tax advice. Listeners should consult an attorney or tax professional regarding their specific legal or tax situation. Listeners should not rely on the content of this podcast as the basis for any investment decisions. A professional advisor should be consulted, and/or independent due diligence should be conducted before implementing anything discussed in this show. While information presented is believed to be factual and up to date, Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not guarantee its accuracy, and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Tandem Growth Financial Advisors, LLC, does not make any representations or warranties as to the accuracy, timeliness, suitability, completeness, or relevance of any information prepared by any unaffiliated third party, such as guests on the podcast, and takes no responsibility for the same.